Well, thank you so much, and we're really excited because True Legends, the third in the series, A Holocaust of Giants, has taken us halfway around the world, from every place from Sardinia to Malta to the jungles of Peru and literally to now the desert Southwest. And this is an unusual documentary from the fact that we have probably some of the most striking eyewitness testimonies to the cover-up, the overwhelming desire of certain people to keep the truth of real history and true history covered up. So we've gone from Sardinia to the desert Southwest, talking to Native American elders about the stargates that they currently activate. You know, people think that this stuff is just wacky until you see, and that you saw the Department of Defense on the Native American.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, it's amazing.
300, I think, and 76 pages. So what we're on is we're on the quest. You know, one of the questions I get asked all the time is, well, where are all the bones? Where are all these giant skulls? And the answer is this. We finally got a breakthrough from one of the Smithsonian former employees stating that, now these are their numbers, especially these individuals who are, let's say, not disgruntled, but they're tired of the cover-up. 149 million out-of-place artifacts are called UPARTs, either historic or scientific. So basically, any of the artifacts, bones, advanced scientific instruments, obviously flying machines, the things that people have only heard and put into a context of science fiction are stuck in 14 warehouses the size of the Raiders of the Lost Ark one. Now, we're so excited about the new DVD, and you've seen the trailer, and Lion, your producer, may have seen the whole thing. It's on Vimeo for download for the people around the world because we want to make it easy for them to get it, and it's so hard now to ship around the world because the cost of shipping is just going up and up and up.
Oh, my gosh, yeah.
So anyway, it's instantly available, and what Tim has done is a good job. He's the writer and director. I'm the producer, and we've followed this path in both True Legends, the first one, True Legends, the Unholy Sea. What we've come up with are answers and some of the most remarkable testimonies of people spanning the globe from Sardinia. By the way, Sardinia, the island of Sardinia, is called the Island of the Giants. And Tim will come on and explain that because he and the film crew were there for almost a month and talking to some of the most remarkable people. And the whole thing is basically revealing. And when I say revealing, in the process of showing people the routes out of the Middle East, or the roots, some people say, and of the giants that spread over all the earth. And it's fascinating because, George, you know, when Tom Horn and Timothy Alberino and I were down in the desert Southwest, we wrote the book Unearthing the Lost World of the Cloud Eaters, Tom Horn and I, but we met with some amazing Native American elders who went on record, and one of them was Cliff Mahudi, you probably know him,
yeah.
and a remarkable man, just a remarkable man, a treasure trove of information, and somebody that really knows what's going on. So we were looking at the compelling evidence of giants, their extraordinary technology, their imminent return, and again, the whole history of the desert Southwest is being rewritten, and we're not just, quote, recording ancient history and I would say this, the official policy that is nowhere near reality, but we're sharing with people the absolute flow of supra-intelligent beings that were, 2 and 3 times the size of human beings. You and I have done shows together over the last decade, and the amount of information historically and the amount of, even into the late 1800s, early 1900s, of giants being turned over, their bones, their artifacts, or technology. But this goes so far beyond that. To my knowledge, there's no one who has ever had this many eyewitnesses. And some of these gentlemen are in their 90s, and I think one of them is approaching 100, very lucid and very specific. By the way, when Tim was in Sardinia, the boys, I'll refer to the boys, those that want this covered up, had a helicopter in the sky. They had their guys who, I guess, watched too many episodes of Raiders of the Lost Ark on cell phones. And I mean, it's a funny story to hear Tim tell it.
Why do they want to cover this up, Stephen?
Because it rewrites the history of the world and puts it into a sense of a non-evolutionary model, and people are going to, as the alien agenda plays out, as more and more historical oddities are found. And by the way, the Antarctic and the Antarctica revelations coming out of Antarctica are just now exploding. We've got some of the biggest aerospace firms in the world moving thousands, and this is from someone in Antarctica down into the under the ice, if you will, area that is not like frozen. It's like a tropical, almost paradise in some areas. It's kind of like the old Doug McClure movie called The Land That Time Forgot. Do you remember that?
I remember that old black and white movie, wasn't it?
Absolutely. And then I think they did a second one that was in color where they go into a prehistoric thing. But the Germans absolutely detailed the entrance into this world, and I think we talked about that on a previous show. But what's most important is to understand that the cover-up is coming apart at the seams. They can't keep it together now. There are even live reports, George, once again, coming out of the jungles of Brazil, coming out of the Far East, the islands of the Pacific, Asia, of more and more people encountering these things. And by the way, with more cell phones around, we're going to see, I believe, a plethora or a flooding of imagery very soon. And when we bring Tim on, he'll share probably one of the most important findings of our investigation that no one has ever put forth before, and we can document it. And that's what happened to the giants that were detailed in the book of Genesis. They're called Rephaim, R-E-P-H-A-I-M.
Were they also the Nephilim?
No, here's the thing. There are people that Nephilim appears twice in history. Once prior to the flood of Noah in Genesis 6, and there were giants in those days.
Hold on, Stephen. We're going to hit this break.
Thank you for having me, George, and good evening, good night to all your listeners.
You too. And Steve, you're with us still?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Now, what I want to do, Tim, is have you set the stage for us for the True Legends, the Holocaust of the Giants. Then I want to run a really short clip of the trailer portion to give people a real idea of what this is. But tell us how you put this together with Steve.
Well, as Steve mentioned earlier, we began in the Desert Southwest, Steve, myself, and Tom Horn, meeting with some of the Pueblo people and talking about some fascinating things. We were on the trail of the Anasazi Indians who mysteriously disappeared in the Desert Southwest. And from there, we went to the island of Sardinia. In our film, we're in the island of Sardinia, and we uncover all kinds of mind-blowing information on the island of Sardinia. As Steve said earlier, we interview people who literally dug up the bones of 9-foot-tall, 10-foot-tall, 15-foot-tall giants with their own hands. Some of these individuals were actually hired by the government to do that very job, specifically to dig up the bones of giants. And many of these bones were sequestered. In fact, all of these bones were either sequestered or were destroyed immediately. We explore the megalithic ruins on the island of Sardinia in the film, and we put the pieces together concerning the Rephaim giants that migrated across the earth. Where did they come from? Where did they go, and how did they get there? We answer these questions in episode 3 of our True Legends series, Holocaust of Giants. And this is proprietary research. This is research that is exclusive to us. We're not in this film. We're not rehashing old information. We have uncovered some new, stunning information concerning the giants, the island of Sardinia, the global cover-up of giants, and information concerning stargates and Native Americans and all kinds of stuff that we put together in this film. So it's 2 hours long, and there's tons of content in it. And so, yeah, I mean, the trailer really tells the story of what's in the film.
All right, let's take a listen to the trailer. It's a couple minutes long, and that'll give you everybody a pretty good idea of the scope of True Legends, the Holocaust of Giants.
I was hired by the government of Sardara to dig up the skeletons of giants. We always carried the bones and the artifacts we found into the church
so they would make the skeletons disappear. And the church was always involved because they didn't want people talking.
So we asked the priest, what are we supposed to do with the skeleton? And he said, break it into pieces and bury it under the foundation of the house.
I personally excavated 2 skeletons that were more than 10 feet tall.
What happened with the Anasazi? A portal opened, a doorway, and the giants came up out of the earth.
It's almost like they were eaten on the run. This was the violent overthrow of the Anasazi.
Tens of thousands of artifacts were carted off to the Smithsonian's repositories, including the bones of the giants.
At the turn of the 19th century, bodies of giants were turning up all over the United States. All over the island of Sardinia, there are massive stone sepulchres famed since time immemorial as tombs of the giants. Everywhere the megalithic towers stood, the tombs of the giants were close by. There may be tens of thousands of giants still buried in the soils of Sardinia today.
Giants are going to return to the earth, are going to rise from the dead.
There is a multi-billion-dollar black market for extractable DNA from the tissue and the bones of dead giants. The stage is now set for mankind to bring about the reemergence of the Rephaim. The enemies of God are about to become the architects of their own divine judgment.
And they talked about thousands of bones being buried there. Stephen, how did they die? What happened to them?
Well, in many cases, George, there was a literally, as some of the ancient records that we found, there was literally a divine intervention, because the giants were not nice entities. They literally ate people. And what the theme of our Unearthing the Lost World of the Cloud Eaters and the whole DVD, the Holocaust of Giants, is literally wherever they went, they devoured the inhabitants. And when Tim was in Peru, and some of the ancient manuscripts that they were fortunate enough to see literally talked about angels, if you will, angelic beings, literally destroying the giants. The giants fled from the Holy Land, and even in meaning of the Far East. And the thing that's interesting is that we have records of actual humans battling them, but more so than that, they battled each other. And they literally consumed each other. When they ran out of people and stuff to eat, they turned on each other. So they turned their swords on each other. And people have got to understand, these aren't Shrek-like creatures. They had angelic, supernatural fathers, and they had a life force that's totally different. And that's why when in the movie you heard my voice talking about the billion-dollar industry for extractable DNA. DARPA, the super soldier program, which we spoke about on Coast to Coast, you and I talked about that, 10, 12 years ago?
We were live for 4 straight hours, I believe. Remember that night?
Yeah, I do, and it was kind of a record-setting night, and we stayed on, but here's the thing. The actual DNA, what you're seeing happening now is you're seeing a redesign of the human DNA, and by adding a third strand of DNA, which is basically a xenogenesis, adding something foreign and apart from human DNA, there's really a world being built of super soldiers. And what else is important for people to understand when it comes to the Egyptian mummification, the Egyptians knew from their fallen angel historical kings that they would be brought back to life. So, when a demon, and I know you're having someone coming on after us that's going to talk about demons, but when a fallen angel's offspring, the giant, the Rephaim, died, that half-human, half-fallen angel spirit became the evil spirits. That's in the book of Enoch and the book of Giants.
Was Goliath one of these giants?
Oh, absolutely. 6 fingers, 6 toes. And Goliath was he had other brothers, too, by the way. He had 4 other brothers who are giants, and that's in 2 Samuel. But what's interesting about that, David had to cut his head off. David cut his head off because the giants have a life force, an emanation, that basically it's like the Green Man, the old Sean Connery movie. Do you remember that one?
I sure do, yeah.
And the whole gist of it is that when Tim was on Sardinia, all of these, what are called the Nuragi towers, the people went into those towers to channel the, if you will, the life force of the giant's bones. Tim, you want to share that? Because I don't think, George, anybody in the world's ever heard this. I don't believe that. Go ahead.
Tim, you still with us?
30,000 megalithic towers on one island. And by the way, for those who are unfamiliar with the island of Sardinia, Sardinia is located west of Rome, south of Corsica, the birthplace of Napoleon Bonaparte. And it is one of the most enigmatic places in the world. I call it ground zero for the Rephaim giants.
That's what Patton wanted to take that for Italy, didn't he?
I believe so.
Yep.
And on this island, this one island, over 30,000 megalithic towers once stood on this one island. But not only megalithic towers, also hundreds, if not thousands, of tombs, which are called today and have been called since time immemorial, the tombs of the giants. And these are very large megalithic tombs. Some of them incorporate massive stones that would have been very difficult to lift without modern equipment. And legend says that the mighty ones, the heroes, the Gibborim, as the Bible calls them, were buried there, the giants. And this is part of the legend of Sardinia. As I said, it's a very enigmatic place. The historical context of Sardinia, the historical narrative of Sardinia as it relates to the distant past, is very nebulous. Nobody knows exactly what was going on that island. There are no clear-cut answers. There's just this civilization that's been dubbed the Nuragic civilization, but nobody really knows who they were. But all evidence in Sardinia points to the fact that these were the Rephaim. These were the Canaanites who fled from the Israelites in the Promised Land. They converged on the island of Sardinia. They built some kind of a stronghold there. These towers and these tombs had something to do with necromancy, with the raising of the Rephaim, the raising of the dead giants. And these, of course, this is concurrent with the legends on Sardinia and I believe with the physical evidence that is still there to this day.
Stephen, does any of this conflict with the book of Genesis in the Bible, or does it verify it?
Well, it verifies it in Genesis 6, chapter 4. And before we went to the last break, there's 2 places you asked the word Nephilim. The correct understanding of that, and there's people that, it's called giants, George, but the Nephilim come from a Hebrew word, Nepal, or a derivation of it. And people argue over this, but it's fascinating. After Numbers 13, 32, and 33, that's the part of the Old Testament that talks about Joshua and Caleb, the spies that went into the land of Canaan to spy it out. they said they were as grasshoppers in their own eyes. In other words, the land devoured its inhabitants. And as we track this thing worldwide, this thing, if you will, the diaspora, the dispersion of the giants throughout the world, they took their cannibalism, their culture, and their magic with them, their ritual magic. And this is what we found in the desert Southwest. It literally speaks. When we were speaking to the Native American elders there, they talked about the history, especially one of their very intelligent university professors that Tom Horn interviewed, and he spoke of his grandfather speaking of those who came up in the Aztec, Inca, and Mayan cultures that basically taught these guys how to open portals or stargates. And when they did, these giants came through and basically devoured them. That's why the Anasazi, the ancient ones, the alien ones, boy, this goes against the official narrative of the National Park Service. And at the Sand Canyon find, they found people literally torn apart, kind of eaten on the run. And there are some people who have done marvelous. And by the way, they know they can tell the cannibalism because even in the the waste of the giants, just like they do in dinosaurs, only proteins that are available after the consumption of human flesh. And now what we're seeing, George, in this country and all over the world is a resurgence of cannibalism, even comedy shows going on Fox and movies and everything, and all of the, if you will, some of the WikiLeaks talking about cannibalism and everything associated with ritual murder. So when the gates of hell were opened, it's interesting. We're in the desert Southwest, and they're telling us, the elders meet, they have a thing called the Giant Society. That's not what we call it. And Tom Horn, Tim Alberino, and I sat and listened, and that the elders go periodically during certain times to a certain place. They open the gates, and they literally open them, and the giants appear almost like like the Stargate movie in a water type image and tell them things that are going to happen. But the most startling thing is, look, they say, we're coming back, just like the pilot that flew the dead giant out of Afghanistan that was on your show a number of years ago.
Exactly, from Kandahar, in that area.
And then L.A. Marzulli talks to some of the shooters there. And by the way, we talked, I actually got to talk to one of the guys that L.A. talked to, and we're talking about separate giants and separate giant takedowns. And one of the soldiers told me he was told to aim higher than normal and to shoot a 40-millimeter grenade at its head. Well, again, the guy said, sir, why would you use that? Isn't that overkill? And basically, you know the story. You do what we say to do. But it goes back to David cutting off Goliath's head. So the giants are so specific in the book of Genesis, and they're related to the fallen angels. And this is where all myths, legends, this is my True Legends book that you've had me on a couple times. We've talked about it. But what Tim has uncovered is what happened to those giants. They fled. Tim, quote the situation about Joshua. This is mind-blowing because, George, again, this is like a time lock. You know, even on your show tonight, Coast to Coast, this is a time lock. And I'm telling you, every time we talk about something like this on your show, then stuff starts to happen, just like Antarctica, and then all the news came out about Hitler, all the Cliff High of the web bots is picking up all the stuff, all the world's leaders are going to Antarctica, they're being briefed, they're being clued in. So, Tim, share that about Joshua, because I don't think people understand the dispersion of the giants across the whole world.
Well, among the Canaanites were tribes of giants. There was even a tribe specifically called the Rephaim. Even before they fled from Joshua, but especially after they fled from Joshua, we believe they converged primarily on the island of Sardinia and built a stronghold there for various purposes. Again, as I said before, part of the purpose was for the reanimation, the reawakening of the Rephaim, the reawakening of the giants. However, they also spread throughout the Mediterranean, and they built a city, a town, on the where present-day Morocco is. It was called Tingis or Tingis by the Romans, and it was in that location there near the Straits of Gibraltar, where they found an inscription that was made by the Phoenicians, which said, "We are those who fled before the face of Joshua the robber." Now, why that's significant is because the Phoenicians...
Hold on for a second, Tim. At the top of the hour, we'll come back with you, Steve Quayle, talk more about your work, True Legends, the Holocaust of Giants. They wandered all over the planet a long time ago.
We were talking about the ancient village of Tingis, what the Romans called Tingis, which is modern-day Tangier on the Straits of Gibraltar. And why that's important to the narration of our film is because the Greeks called the Canaanites the Phoenicians. So the Phoenicians essentially, the Canaanites essentially became the Phoenicians, and the Phoenicians were the great seafarers of the ancient world. They were also the great builders of the ancient world. And there's a lot that could be said about that. But in the town of Tingis, or Tingis, there was an inscription on these pillars that was left by the Phoenicians, which read, "We are those who fled before the face of Joshua the robber." And why that's important to us in the context of our film is because we can trace what happened with the Rephaim giants after they were dispersed from the land of Canaan, and how the Phoenicians, how the giants, how the seed of the giants was dispersed all over the earth. And essentially, it was carried around the earth, carried around the globe by the Phoenicians. And the Phoenicians were there were regular-sized people, obviously, in the populace of the Phoenicians, but among them, there was the seed of the Rephaim, the giants. The Phoenicians had a giant cult. They worshipped the giants. And they buried the giants in these tombs, and they worshipped the giants. And the Phoenicians and the Canaanites were famous for their sorcery. The sorcery of the Phoenicians, the sorcery of the Canaanites. This was the type of sorcery that the Israelites were constantly getting in trouble with after they conquered the land of Canaan. This is very powerful sorcery, especially as it relates to necromancy. And necromancy is precisely communication, intercourse with the dead, and even raising of the dead, which is exactly what we find on the island of Sardinia as it relates to giants. And again, there were over 30,000 of these megalithic towers on the island of Sardinia, and hundreds, if not thousands, of megalithic tombs called the Tombs of the Giants. And it's a fascinating situation. The Phoenicians literally seeded the race of Rephaim all over the earth, and that's how the giants got displaced all over the earth. And eventually, the giants, look, part of the reason why we call our film Holocaust of Giants, it's a play on words. It's because the giants were cannibals and devoured humans wherever they were found. But also, there was a divine mandate, a divine Holocaust mandated from heaven against the giants. And we find this in numerous legends. We find it obviously in the biblical account. Steve mentioned we find it in Peru, a very vivid depiction of this in Peru, where an angel literally cuts down giants, 15-foot giants, and we find this all over the earth. So that's part of the reason why the film is called Holocaust of Giants. The giants were eventually, in many cases, bred out in the populations into which they mingled all over the earth. And so it's a fascinating narrative that we put together in this film, and it all centers around the island of Sardinia, ground zero for the Rephaim post-flood giants.
And, Stephen, you kind of traced some of these into Utah and other areas here in North America, did you not?
Absolutely, especially in Utah, especially southern Utah, the area around Monument Valley, and even what they call the Valley of the Gods. And as I shared with you earlier, George, in an email, we've been down there, and I've been down there for last week was down there for about 10 hours filming these areas, and sometimes from the film, and filming in a Cineplex, which means it's a gyro-stabilized camera, and just like you see in the movies, very stable. But we're on the trail of the giants, and even the area around the Pueblo people, they were eaten out of existence. And so when we're talking about global giants, in our DVD, we have an actual Phoenician, if you will, illustration from antiquity that shows a giant on the ship of the Phoenicians as they settled all over the world. So it's hard for people in America to understand that we're talking about Phoenicians in the United States. Boy, even Barry Fell, who's dead now, he wrote Bronze Age America, Saga America, and America BC. We're talking about 2000 BC in some areas of the world, and the Egyptians. You know, when you and I talk about this stuff, how is it that you have Egyptian names in the Grand Canyon or in the Valley of the Gods.
Right, and artifacts, too.
And artifacts. And the thing is that we're going to incorporate that. And so, True Legends, a DVD series, I think, well, first of all, I know there's never been anything like it. And as Tim stated, we're not basically copying, we're investigating. And the next one I'll give everybody a hint on, it's called Beyond the Bones. We're getting real-time reports, George, even of blonde-haired blue-eyed giants in the jungles of Brazil. Now, why is that important? These aren't just Dr. Mengele leftovers. These are absolute legends that the Mayan, the Aztec, and Incas talked about the giants, if you will, the gods, G-O-D-S, little, that came from the east, with white beards, blue eyes, and long blonde and white hair. And yet the thing that people don't want to admit is the fact that these were the, if you will, supernatural dudes. You see, these aren't guys that go around in caves beating women on the head, and like
with a bone in,
yeah. This isn't like that at all. And the technology, that's another thing that people need to understand. The fallen angels were their fathers. The fathers taught their offspring well. And this is something, here's the biggest revelation I want people to understand tonight. They have the DNA of these entities. There's been a global black market and secret science going on to find these people, and even to the point of finding people that have, if you will, the giant genes in order to reconstitute those genes and then allow the spirit, which is an evil spirit, a demon. There's different people that will argue about this, but the fact is that when even going to Isaiah 13, I sent you before the show a fascinating Septuagint translation, which was the Greek out of the Hebrew, but it basically says this. It says, lift up a standard on the mountain of the plain, exalt the voice to them, beckon with the hand, open the gate, ye rulers. It's talking about rulers of the underworld. I give command and I bring them. Giants are coming to fulfill my wrath, rejoicing at the same time and insulting. So you read that in the King James, it talks about the mighty ones and the Gibborim, as Tim brought up earlier. So what we're saying to people is this. There are people that literally are looking forward and doing their best to bring the genetic giant seed back. And what's going to happen is they think they will control the giants, but based on our understanding of the myths, of legends, and the historic artifacts, it's going to turn out against them. In other words, when you think you're in control of the giant, you may understand that you'll be feeding him, one thing, and then when they run out of that one thing you're feeding him, whatever it happens to be, you're next for lunch. And the point is that there's been a fairy tale approach to this, but when we go to what I would call hardcore root research of the giants, isn't a happy camper sitting around the fire talking about the good old days in the Middle East. And the Native Americans know this, and the Native Americans have been told so many things. It's just like CERN, C-E-R-N, or Sesame. The Sesame is actually a name of a Middle East particle collider. Are you familiar with that one?
Sure am.
And do you remember, George, the movies? And obviously I think you and I can remember the cartoons of Ali Baba and his 40 Thieves. And you would say, open Sesame, and Sesame would open the secret cave of treasures.
That's right. And remember Sinbad and all that?
Got it. And so and Sesame, ladies and gentlemen, stands for Synchrotron Light for Experimental Science Applications. And that's how they say sesame. Some people pronounce it sesame, but it's the same thing. The thing that's interesting is that as we go, George, we're told, and I think this may have gone over some people's heads, we're told that not only the Native American elders opening the gates, and I've asked, people in the military how they open the gates, and they usually say three things: a power source, a specific sound or frequency, and also words. Well, I didn't come out and say, like Open Sesame, but when I saw this, Open Sesame Particle Accelerator Project brings Middle East together, it comes to the point where it's hard for people to grasp that we've been pre-programmed, as you know, to not only now believe in portals, but know by theoretical physics that they exist. know that there are new realms of physics being open to the public. They've been around for a long time, and now we have to deal with this. The Human Genome Project, and this is where it gets interesting, the Human Genome Project behind the scenes is to identify the seed of the Rephaim, the giants, because they've already isolated a Hercules gene. They've also, and I believe there was a little girl in Romania who was 90 pounds, 95 pounds, and could do, major lifting, like, I don't know, close to 6, 7, 8 times her weight. Some people claimed it was 900 pounds. But the point is that can you imagine if the viable DNA of some of the most evil entities in history get reunited with the combination human giant, if you will, or human fallen angel hybrid spirit? I don't think these are going to be good times on planet Earth.